ARP spoofing and switches. So let me remind you about switches again, which are where the network cables are plugged in. That's the switch. Switches keep a table of Ethernet MAC addresses called a MAC table. It uses these unique MAC addresses for your devices to send traffic to its destination on the LAN and works at the data link layer, layer 2. Once data is traveling on your local network, IP addresses are not used anymore. MAC addresses are used for traffic to find its destination to the local network. IP addresses are only used on the internet and when you have some sort of routing device. When you have just a switch or a hub, then you're only using MAC addresses. Switches offer more security over hubs because switches have what is called isolated collision domains, which is a fancy way to say that you can't sniff the traffic on the network with a switch because traffic only gets forwarded to the correct physical LAN port based on the MAC address. So when traffic goes into the switch or the router, the switch knows what the MAC address is. So instead of sending that data to all the devices, it just sends it to that one physical port and down that wire. Therefore, anyone else who's plugged into that switch won't receive that data. That's the isolated collision domain. On an Ethernet network connected via a switch, it is relatively easy to perform man-in-the-middle attacks. An attacker fools other devices on the network into believing that the attacker is the default gateway or the router by abusing the address resolution protocol or ARP. The attacker can then observe, record, inject into and manipulate traffic. With a Wi-Fi network, traffic can also be manipulated in this way. If you have a hub instead of a switch, you can observe all the traffic anyway, but if you want to perform injection and manipulation, you would need to do ARP spoofing. Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP, as the name suggests, this is IP to MAC resolution. It works at the data link layer. It resolves the network layer IP address into data link layer MAC addresses. And here you can see I've entered the command ARP-A. And what you can see here is the ARP cache or ARP table for this device. It knows that to connect to this IP address 192.168.1.1, which happens to be the default gateway, it should send network frames to that MAC address. This one here. When a device on your local network wants to connect to another device, if it doesn't have an entry in its ARP table to connect to the IP address it wants to connect to, then it needs to issue an ARP request to resolve the IP to MAC and gain the MAC address. ARP is used to find out the MAC address. ARP broadcasts a frame requesting the MAC address for the IP it has. The device with the correct IP replies with its correct MAC address. This is then added to the ARP table cache. With tools like ARP Spoof, EtherCap, which are available in Kali, and a tool called Kane Enable in Windows, an attacker or malware with similar functionality on the network could fool other devices on the network that they are the correct MAC address for the router's IP address by simply responding to say, me, I'm the router, I'm the router. This is ARP spoofing. This is ARP poisoning. And why is this possible? It seems like it perhaps shouldn't be possible. Well, it's because ARP has no authentication. Anyone can say that they are anyone. ARP was developed in a time where it was thought that devices on the local network were all trusted devices. But unfortunately, this is not the case anymore. So there is absolutely zero security around this. Zero security. The attacker, once this ARP spoofing has been done, would see all of the traffic of the victim instead of the router and can perform the attacks that we mentioned, the manipulation, the injection, SSL stripping, attacking the browser, etc., etc. Obviously, you do need the attacker to be internal for this to be a problem. And then even if the attacker is internal, they would have to be wanting to perform these sorts of attacks. Some people are concerned that this is the way malware, particularly ransomware, may move towards. So once it's infected one device, it will try and then propagate onto the rest of the network. If you want to learn more about ARP spoofing, a good page is this by Iron Geek. He has quite a lot of good info and videos, so check out his website. So that's one way to create man-in-the-middle attacks, injections and manipulation, but it doesn't end there in terms of the weaknesses of ARP and Ethernet. You can also, using tools such as TuxCut, and there's also another one here called Netcut, you can perform denial of service attacks using the ARP protocol. And ironically, these tools can also be used for protecting you against such attacks as well. As we go through, we're going to cover mitigations to the ARP related issues.